Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Hughes, and tonight I'll be briefing you all on Power for All and the work we've been doing on the climate finance for the agri-food sector. We'll begin with a brief overview of our client and the objective of our project. Next, we'll discuss how we selected a manageable scope, who we decided to be our end user, and some of the insights we gathered from our data collection efforts. We'll end with our group's recommendations and some Q&A. So before we start, this is the team that's worked so diligently on the project over the last few months. We'd like to extend our gratitude to our faculty advisor, Chanda, who's provided valuable insights throughout our project. So, who is Power for All? Our client is a nonprofit organization focused on growing the market for distributed renewable energy, or DRE, with the goal of ending energy poverty and inequality in the global power system. Their work centers around three key strategies. First, they drive the pro-DRE narrative by citing its positive effects on education, quality of life, and economic development. Second, they've partnered with over 300 organizations to advocate for DRE adoption at the government level. And finally, they've begun to launch pilot projects that act as a sort of blueprint for cost-effective implementation of DRE solutions. The team currently operates campaigns throughout India and Africa, and has been featured in publications like CNBC Africa and Bloomberg. So Power for All has tasked our team with addressing the current landscape of climate finance, specifically for the agri-food sector and related DRE solutions. Currently, there's an immense funding gap, with Climate Policy Initiative estimating that the current annual shortfall for small farmers is $170 billion. This gap is largely due to the lack of private capital flowing to the agri-food sector, with a majority of flows coming from public sources like development banks and philanthropies in the forms of grants and concessionary loans. It's absolutely crucial that private capital is unlocked in order to bridge this gap. Now, our team has decided to address this gap through 4 steps. First, we've reported on the current status of climate finance, both globally and in sub-Saharan Africa. Next, we've contextualized the gap by detailing the issues faced in the DRE space and the agri-food space. Next, we've identified opportunities for the implementation of DRE technologies on farms, like solar-powered irrigation, cold storage, and processing equipment. And finally, we've provided recommendations for end users of our report that focus not only on how to bridge the financing gap, but also how to access and efficiently utilize capital as it becomes available. Now, this gap that we just mentioned is a global figure. In order to complete a detailed analysis of the issues and provide specific recommendations, we decided to focus on sub-Saharan Africa specifically. While agricultural concerns persist in other regions of the world, like India and South America, focusing our research on sub-Saharan Africa was appropriate given the time constraints of our project. We've also decided to limit our analysis of the agri-food sector to small and medium-sized farms. These farms are most suitable for DRE implementation, given the limited scale of power needed. Also, small farms provide up to 80% of food in the region. As for our end users, we've identified 3 key groups of stakeholders, including DRE firms, policymakers, and investors. Even after defining our scope, our mandate was quite broad, given the complexities faced by all the different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as all the different actors involved. That's why, after our exploratory research phase, we divided the group into separate research objectives, including financial instruments and models, current funding sources of climate finance, sectoral and geographical allocations, and some institutional barriers and frameworks related to agriculture. After completing our research, our group convened to find common themes and issues and to develop these recommendations for our end users. We're currently in the report writing stage and plan to have a draft with our client by the end of the week. Drilling down a bit on our data collection, we utilized 3 research methods. First, we completed desktop research, citing reports from organizations like the Climate Policy Initiative, USAID, the African Development Bank, and others. Also, we found and further developed case studies from the Green Climate Fund, Shell, and the Carbon Initiative for Development. Second, we completed interviews with various climate finance professionals, all of whom shared their insights into the issues they face when investing in agriculture and energy in Africa. And finally, we utilized client resources from Power for All's website, including reports on how DRE can reshape agriculture for communities and provide a just transition for food systems in the face of climate change. All of these efforts really reconfirm the existence of this funding gap, especially for small-scale agriculture. We did find that the energy sector as a whole is well-funded, but solutions are currently focused on central power generation and not distributed energy. Our group faced two major challenges throughout our semester. First, we came across an abundance of data, but it was very inconsistent. As I'm sure you all know, data is a problem for all climate transition efforts. But given the rural focus of our report, we came across a lot of different methods of data aggregation and clear distinctions in the quality of data. This is why we prioritized using data from reputable sources in our report and provided ranges of values when necessary. Second, we had some trouble identifying our end user at first. There's so many different actors involved here, and we wanted to incorporate all of them into our solutions, right? But that didn't seem feasible. So we were able to discuss this with our client and settled primarily on the DRE firms along with the investors and policymakers. Now moving on to some key findings. We've identified these 5 key barriers to climate finance access and expansion, and these drove our recommendations. High initial capital expenditures and transaction costs, a lack of feasible financing models, and high perceived risks all currently limit the amount of private capital flowing to the agri-food sector because they limit the returns for the projects. Meanwhile, a lack of financial infrastructure and intermediaries, as well as clear political and institutional barriers, limit the ability of DRE firms to access financing that's already been allocated to the region due to red tape, limited financial knowledge, or a lack of financial channels. For our recommendations, we've tailored them to our different end users. First, frameworks and regulations at the country and municipal level must be strengthened and realigned to stop subsidizing fossil fuels and start subsidizing the deployment of DRE. Second, DRE firms and project developers need to create bespoke financial models that utilize public finance to improve returns for private investors. This is known as blended finance. By doing this, returns improve and private investors and private capital will begin to flow into the region, and a more robust project pipeline can develop. After that happens, investors can place an emphasis on the importance of capacity building and technical assistance. As more projects are initiated, it's crucial that they're scalable as well. Capacity building and technical assistance facilities allow for farming practices and DRE implementation that can be sustained both financially and environmentally for decades. Our final recommendation centers on the encouragement of strategic partnerships and collaboration. This recommendation aims to further unlock financial and technical resources from a diverse set of actors, like corporations and development organizations. In our report, we've paired each of these recommendations with a case study that delves a little further into the actual aims and implementation strategies of each. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you all for your time and your attention. Any questions?
Great presentation. Thank you so much. Could you please tell us a little bit more about this blended finance concept? I found it pretty cool.
Sure. So when you're setting up a project and you're looking at the financial aspects of it, there's a capital structure, right? So the way that a lot of these projects currently get financed, which isn't enough, is through grants and concessionary loans, like I said. But as you provide more capital to a project up front, the more potential it has to provide better returns, both financially and socially in the future. It's called scaling it up, right, or leveraging it. Now, if you want to have a certain amount of capital, right, you need to attract a certain amount of investors. The financial returns currently aren't enough for private capital investors to come in and invest in these projects. By offering certain leniencies to the private investors, like right of first loss for the public investors, right, their risk rate comes down and their return goes up. That's the basic, structuring around it.
Great job. I was wondering if you did any interviews with people who lived in the area or stakeholders outside the financial sector?
We focused most of our research on the financial sector because Power for All really has a lot of the social and technical aspects of this down, right? And we're presenting to DRE firms, right? So they don't really need the assistance on the technical side or the implementation side, right? They need to know how to access the capital. So that's really where we focused most of our research. We did have some content in there about actual implementation strategies, but I don't think we interviewed anyone that didn't have a financial background.
Right. Does this project is it able to generate carbon credits that you can sell?
I'm sure there are some ways of doing it, right? That's an excellent point. I think that has a lot of potential in the financial structuring of it, right? If countries in Africa start to develop that carbon market, right, that credit market, I think that's definitely an option in the future. But we really didn't explore that avenue currently. I don't think the infrastructure for that is in place yet, but excellent idea.
So,
I do.